Now, Craig Stobo, as you know, one of New Zealand's leading business people, he hasn't been on the show for the last couple of weeks because, well, he'll tell us where he's been and what he's learned over the last couple of weeks while he's been away. Because, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he thought. Going away to Ireland, he's been leading, as I understand, a delegation of business people to Ireland, and then coming back again, and what he, if he's noticed any difference while he's been away and come back. And he joins us on the show now. Craig, good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael. How are you?
I'm well, mate. Now, how long were you in Ireland for?
The delegation of NZ CEOs and directors, about 36 of us, was across there for 5 business days, and some of us took time before and after to head to the countryside and get a bit more of a flavour of rural Ireland, but five business days in Dublin, Glasgow and Belfast, learning about what we call the Irish secrets. And we went to Ireland because they're a small open economy, and that follows trips that we've done to Denmark in 2019 and Switzerland in 2017, trying to figure out, why are these countries doing on the face of it so much better than we are, and then bring those lessons back here and do something about it. And it's important that we leave New Zealand to look back. I quite like this quote from Salman Rushdie, if you excuse me for a moment, Michael, but to forget that there is a world beyond the community to which we belong, to confine ourselves within narrowly defined cultural frontiers, would be, I believe, to go volunteer into that form of internal exile, which is called the homeland. I quite like that because getting out of New Zealand, looking back, helps us frame up, objectively, by way of the comparison with another country, what we need to do. The reason we picked on Ireland, apart from being a small open economy like ours of 5 million people, was that before 1990, they had the same GDP per capita as us. Now, Irish GDP is over 1,000 billion New Zealand dollars, and our GDP, when you convert from USD comparisons, it's around 400 billion. So we're a lot less, and we sort of asked ourselves, why is that? So we went across, and there's probably about, 20% of New Zealand's GDP represented by the people that were there. And you put it in context, and there's a bit of luck with the Irish, as you should expect, four-leaf clovers, etc. But, they're obviously a member of the EU, and they're close to the EU. They're English-speaking, and are now, following Brexit, the only English-speaking nation in the EU. They've had a history of external migration since the famines in the 1840s, 1850s, when, believe it or not, Ireland had a bigger population at 8 million than England, and they're now 5 million today. So they're the only country that I can think of that's had external migration to that extent. But fortunately, about 35 million now live in the States, the world's most advanced economy and the second largest democracy, and that has benefits for Ireland, including, I think, 26 of their presidents claim to be Irish, and Biden went up to Ireland the last 6 months ago. We're also homogenous as a country, largely Catholic faith. They don't have the racial differences that New Zealand has. And they have a very strong rule of law, privacy, and a history of an aversion to collectivism, which I suspect is based on the kind of Catholic Church. So that's sort of a background which makes it different to New Zealand.
Craig, when you talk about an aversion to collectivism, do you mean that they don't like socialism?
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely correct.
Very strong on individual liberties, but also enterprise and that sort of stuff.
Yep. Private property, private copyrights. They might help each other at harvest, but they each own their own output. Kind of philosophy. It's helping each other as neighbours, but hey, they own the output of the crops or the milking, etc. So the thing that we were focused on was, okay, that's different to us. That's fine. We get that. What are the policy decisions they've made? And there are 3 that we sort of focused on. One was education, and we'll talk about a little bit about that. Their tax system is different to ours. These are decisions they've made themselves, not forced on them by external issues like Brexit or migration. And foreign direct investment. So you sort of go back in the history a little bit and you look at the guy who was Secretary of Finance back in the late 1950s, a guy called T.K. Whitaker, and he wrote an important paper on economic development for Ireland to move from what was an agricultural economy to industrialisation, and to basically by the mid-1960s they were accepting 350 new global companies into Ireland. And there was this embracing of the need to change and to be part of the world, to bring the world to Ireland. So That then followed in the 70s and 80s by ploughing the transfers they got from the European community into education. And then in 1994, they got their investment development agency to focus on the promotion and development of high-quality foreign direct investment into Ireland. That agency in over 20 countries, actively promoting Ireland as a destination for foreign investment. And importantly, although not the major issue that we could see, but importantly, the tax rate changed for corporations in 1997 to 12.5%. That's going to go to about 15% to harmonise with the EU. That's a substantial advantage. So now you have, I think...
Craig, you're breaking up again, mate. I'm sorry.
Right.
Your connection with us, again, I don't know where you are speaking from or what, but Josh is just going to try and reconnect you. So, Josh, could you just reconnect Craig for me for a second, please? All right. Thank you.
How's that better?
Yeah, that's a bit better, Craig. We're wandering around the room. Were you talking?
No, I'm seated talking. No.
Oh, okay.
Static from my end.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So they've had an investment development agency since 1994 that's focused on promoting foreign direct investment. They've present in 20 countries promoting that, and they've got a lower corporation tax rate of 12.5%. Now, the top 10 global pharmaceutical companies are in Ireland. They've got software, medical technology, and financial institutions. It's just a very, very different feeling there when you've got this multinational presence in Ireland who provide employment to Irish graduates and a complete consensus to continue to grow in that fashion. So we visited Intel, which is a 30 billion euro investment, and you sort of compare that to New Zealand's foreign direct investment regime, which is about $2.5 billion US. So substantially different. And then you look at education. In 2000, New Zealand was number 3 in maths and number 4 in reading in the PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, which is a global measurement of education. And now in 2018, Ireland is 4th and we're 27th. 78. So we've just slid down the rankings, Michael. And it was appalling to me to hear Minister Hipkins, when he was Minister of Education, on TV talking about this relative slide. And I haven't quite got the quote right because it's relying on memory from TV1 or TV3, I can't remember, but the quote was more or less, he was pleased that other countries were doing so well. And I thought that probably hit the nail on the head in terms of the way we want to compete in the world and to attract the best and brightest to our educational facilities, to enable them to get good jobs in New Zealand. And so what we've sort of come with as a policy response to that is, in New Zealand we need a much more outward-looking, progressive foreign direct investment regime, which means abolishing the Overseas Investment Act and allowing these people to come into our economy to create jobs and exports for our people. And something that you've been working on over the last week with your speakers is a laser-like focus on changing our education curriculum to focus more on knowledge-rich subjects, the STEM subjects, literacy and numeracy achievement, and guidance for teachers on a sequence of learning. So you get a sense of humility when you visit places like Ireland about how well they have done, the consensus they have to continue to develop. And you come back to New Zealand and you sort of like, we've got an uphill battle here, but we've now got some benchmarking amongst a group of executives, leaders in the business community to say, we're up for change and we need to do that.
I'm glad you've raised that, though, because in many ways what you've come back to, though, is a philosophy or a culture, Craig, that in actual fact says New Zealand isn't failing and that those PISA rankings are immaterial or irrelevant. So for many, although there are a number of speakers that you've listened to over the last week and that I've profiled, and we've talked about it before, who are deeply concerned at the state of the New Zealand education system, those within the system and those responsible for it in terms of both policy and management are saying everything's fine, there's nothing wrong here. I mean, isn't that the problem? There's not even an acceptance that there is an issue.
That's part of the issue. And I think shining a light on our relative rankings helps us understand that. And the Minister's comment, or the previous Minister of Education's comments around, well, haven't they done well overseas, is just unacceptable to someone who wants to ensure that our country is getting towards the top of those rankings and our people have the best opportunities with their education to get great jobs and build families and build ecosystems and businesses themselves in New Zealand and overseas. So I don't accept at all that we should stay where we are. And I don't accept that the Ministry of Education is the only view on these issues. And I'd like to think that parents become more concerned about what that means, not just for their children today, but their children's children. It's incredible that our rankings, our PISA rankings, have fallen so quickly from 2000 to 2018, which is that last survey I quoted you, and that was for year 11 students. So, you know, there are still people coming through the system who are obviously subject to these new curriculum changes proposed by the Ministry of Education that I've learned on my return to New Zealand, which is a real concern. You know, focusing on STEM, on those subjects, literacy and numeracy, is important. And I share your concerns on the word holistic, because we don't know what that means in education terms. It's very difficult to define that.
Actually, this is a brilliant. I'm really glad we were going to always talk to you about when you came back from Ireland. It's really interesting you've put education up front and centre as one of the things that the Irish have all over us. I was going to talk later on today about the science curriculum, which you also would have caught up with since you've come back into the country, Craig, and the integration of Mātauranga Māori, and science teachers saying, what the hell is that? Because they don't know and are meant to now teach it as part of the new science curriculum. That's the first thing I was going to get your response on. The second was that boys are doing better at New Zealand in single-sex schools. I think you went to a single-sex school. And the third is kids are doing better in faith-based schools in this country, be they Catholic, Anglican or Presbyterian. Is there some correlation between all those things that you saw in Ireland, particularly around education, and do you think those connections at home as well? Mātauranga Māori being imposed into our curriculum without anybody really understanding what it is, particularly in science. Then you've got single-sex schools doing better than boys in the state secondary co-ed schools. But then this other one, much more prominent even than that, is children who are educated in faith-based schools, Catholic, Presbyterian, Anglican in particular, obviously achieving at a much higher rate than the state system is providing. What's your response to that?
One by one. So on Mātauranga Māori, I think it's pretty clear to me that a subject worthy of discussion on its own, but not integrated into science subjects. I mean, you know, let's get really frank here. The issue is the quality of knowledge that you build in those subject matters. You learn about the physical world, how it works. A separate subject on Mātauranga Māori, fine, don't have an issue with that. But it's very hard for me to see how that is integrated with what is a Western-based view of science. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, that is the real world. I don't think you'd produce the Rutherfords of the world from New Zealand with a holistic view of science. He would have learnt at Nelson College through an accumulation of a body of knowledge with which to apply those techniques to the real world. And I just think that's still appropriate for our children's education. Very happy to have Mātauranga as a separate subject, though. Don't have a problem with that. But integration is extremely difficult. You just don't know how to. I don't know how to do that, and how to measure it.
And what about the faith-based and boys' schools?
Yeah, so second, so boys and girls. I think that sort of goes to almost an individual discussion around what is the best education for boys and girls at particular stages of development. So if it works for boys, in a boys' school, great, similar for girls, or if you want a mixed school as a choice, I think that's the key thing. Let parents have some choices around those, and they can send their children, if it's possible, in their area to do that. Some don't have the choice, obviously, but those that can do, they should think about that from a family perspective. In terms of religion, interesting, I don't like that word, but in Ireland we had the benefit of a morning with the Ministry of Education, and they actually have a sponsorship system which sits beneath the central government, which enables funds to flow into, from memory, the Catholic-based schools, Protestant-based schools, and then non-denominational. And the state's agnostic as to the school form, but clearly parents want to choose their various religious or non-religious destinations for their children. And I think that can be developed in New Zealand to a similar form of choice, which a while ago was called charter schools. If people want to send their kids to a charter school, then great. Why not? And providing choice obviously provides a bit of competition between the various forms of channels of schooling. So I thought that was a peculiarity of the Irish education system, but it had some applicability to New Zealand. And if parents think that works for their children, are faith-based, then fantastic. And it provides the schooling that's set at standards, those numeracy and literacy standards I mentioned before. Why not?
Oh, well, I mean, it's not the parents. I mean, these are empirical observations of the NCA achievement rates and university entrance pass rates and things like that, which show that, those faith-based schools, I suspect they're a bit more old-fashioned. I suspect they're a bit more structured. Perhaps those schools, Craig, I accept the method in which they instruct children is slightly more conservative than our state secondary schools, and maybe that's also part of it.
Yeah, there's certainly an element of clarity required around the guidance through our teachers on the sequence of learning, kids' development through time, and how teachers can stack or build subject matter and knowledge as platforms of each level of knowledge is ticked off and gained. You move to the next level. But that kind of structure stuff may well be present in religious denomination schools compared to others, Michael. I'm not sure, but those sort of progressions and help the teachers to build that stack of knowledge and pass it on to students. I think is an important part of the reform process that we need in our education system.
Ireland does have one enormous advantage over New Zealand. Obviously, it's its proximity to its markets, which is just there. We unfortunately are stuck, as you know, at the bottom of the South Pacific, so it takes a lot further time. And also, just in simple stuff, Craig, just like and be able to communicate, just like and be able to get down, talk to businesses that are just literally an hour, maybe flight or 2 hours flight away, which is not the New Zealand way. They have those advantages, but you're saying there are specific things that Ireland have done in terms of policy. You're talking particularly around encouraging high-grade investment and I guess international investment. The corporate tax rate in Ireland, what's that compared to New Zealand?
Well, our corporate tax rate here is 28 cents in the dollar, and that 12.5% corporation tax rate, as I mentioned, is going to move to 15 to harmonise with the EU, some changes at the EU level. And I think that's an important component of the tripod. Education is a valued profession in Ireland. It's what they told us at the Ministry of Education. I don't think that translates into necessarily, salary differences necessarily to New Zealand, but it is a value that the Irish hold. The teachers are an important part of their society. The tax rate that we've just mentioned and the decision to attract foreign direct investment. So part of those GDP numbers I mentioned earlier on before, the economic growth numbers, are clearly linked to the ability of that tax rate to attract multinationals to Ireland and to book those non-residential revenues that occur offshore but are booked in the head office of Ireland. So in some senses, if you adjust large GDP differences, Ireland, New Zealand, to domestic, you get a lower number, but it's still more than 50% larger than New Zealand. So my thinking is, why would you accept a restrictive Overseas Investment Act outcome here, despite the context issues that are different? Yes, they're close to EU, they're a member of the EU, for sure. But we need to think about our own context here, and I don't see why we shouldn't attempt to deliver the benefits of multinational presence in New Zealand by changing the way we run foreign direct investment, which is very much a barrier philosophy. It's assisting, it's a policing authority, and you can't come here issue these conditions, and by the way, the minister has to sign off. Very different in Ireland, where the society embraces these businesses because they're high quality, they employ people, they create spin-outs and spin-offs such as construction, education, vocational training. All these things come out of that initial discussion back in the late 1950s to open up Ireland to opportunities for their people. And I think that's a brilliant strategy that we should not miss this trick. We should look carefully at that Overseas Investment Act and say, does it serve a purpose of creating jobs for our children and enable them to grow from opportunities servicing those large companies with their own businesses? So we have a different context for sure, but man, we make it hard for ourselves. Why do we impose such high hurdles on ourselves when we don't have to? We can change that, and that and the education piece are two important things that we brought back from that trip.
Craig, thank you very much for that. Just before we go, and just sort of signalling, I'd like to talk more on this, obviously, in the next time we have a chat. But I'm just interested, very, very quickly, if you think that the coming election in 99 days is critical to New Zealand, or whichever side gets in, from your perspective, it won't make too much difference. What do you think?
No, critical. What we observed in Ireland was business was around the table helping, discussing, curating outcomes for communities. Business is not consulted by the current government. It's not business friendly at all. And if you think that the purpose of business, and I'm quoting, and you'll appreciate, association of sentences with wisdom from other places, Michael, but there's a professor at Oxford University who quite neatly encapsulated the purpose of business, which is to profitably serve or solve the society's problems or communities' problems. That's what businesses do. And business is not supported by government here to solve those problems. We're effectively shut out, and Wellington is seen as a place that can deliver or execute on some of these things. But I can't think of a single policy, whether it's construction of housing or other social problems that the government confronts, where the government's done a good job at execution. That's just not the way things are done in Ireland. And I would like a change in government to enable businesses to flourish and to solve society's problems. That's what we're good at, but solve them profitably. And to move away from a culture that is Wellington knows best. And that doesn't work for all of New Zealand. We're different in different parts of New Zealand. We need businesses locally to solve local issues. So I think this election is critical for changes that we would like to bring back to New Zealand, or the lessons we've learned from Ireland, and try and change those for a better outcome. Try and think about growing the pie as opposed to thinking about how to distribute a shrinking pie. And they're two very different worldviews. Thank you very much, Craig. I really appreciate your insight, mate. You have a very good weekend. Look forward to talking to you next week. That's Craig Stobo, Chief Executive of Wind Farms, but former diplomat. He is currently the head of Otago University's Business School, or rather, he's the patron of Otago University's Business School. And he has also headed up, in actual fact, for both Alan Clark, I think, and John Key, major tax investigations and inquiries on behalf of the New Zealand government as well. But there you go.